Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Elemental and The Flash prove themselves to be possibly the biggest box office flops that we have ever seen, or at the very least, the biggest box office flops of this generation, as both films could potentially lose well over $200 million each. Now, there are certain caveats, there are certain conditions that would be needed for those numbers to be hit. However, it is still, I know, River, I know. It is still important to recognize that no matter how much money these movies lose, no matter how little these movies lose, they're going to be losing money, and they're going to be losing quite a bit of it. All of this while the narrative from the media continues to be to try to pander and try to make things sound much better than what they actually are. As you can see right here, it doesn't say anything about the film's flopping. It just says Elemental shows spark overseas. The Flash crosses 200 million worldwide. But when you actually break down the numbers and when you actually look at the data, you're realizing, wait a minute. Am I taking crazy pills here? Nancy, Tony over at Deadline, you who love to clickbait titles, you who love to try to put all your little fun spins on the movies and the narratives, etc., you're not going to take advantage of something right in front of you? Why is that? Why is that the case? Why is it that probably in about a week, maybe 2 or 3, then you'll start to say, looking back, what went wrong? Or looking back, how this movie lost X amount of money? It starts to make you wonder, right? In the first 2 weeks of release, that is the time when movies need to make the most money because that's when they make the most money. And it's also when they tend to make the most back on the money that they get in, right? Because of the different deals that can be made with movie theaters. Usually those first 2 weeks, they get the highest return on those ticket sales, with everything after 2 weeks much more going to the theater versus what they would get back in return from this, as the studio itself. And because of that, it is so important. So why is it then that you tend to see these giant media companies playing very nice, it seems, with certain films and certain studios in the first couple weeks of release, and then as soon as that happens, all of a sudden, then you start to see a little bit more honesty, etc. Now, that's pure speculation on my part. Maybe it's even conspiracy theorist on my part, but I think it is still something to think about. But before going any further into that and many other stuff, please make sure to smash that like button, not that fire button, honestly, smash the rumble button as well, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. I always stumble over that. Let's go ahead and dive into this. So first, Nance, good old Nance over on Deadline, talks about, right, how the Little Mermaid's nearing 500 million worldwide. Oh my goodness, it's gonna do it. You all said it was never gonna cross 500 million. I said it would be very, very difficult, and I would doubt it. But hey, kudos, you crossed, or very close to crossing $500 million. Guess what? You still need to make at least minimum $625 million to break even, and that ain't happening. So you're still looking at yourself at a well over $100 million loss. And it just gets worse for Disney when you look at how much more money Elemental will likely lose for them in the long run as well. As you can see right here, it says, after 2 major studio movies bowed last week, this session was one of holdovers for Hollywood with mixed results. That's very kind words there, Nance. Last weekend, leader The Flash, which had initially come in lower than projections, added $26.6 million in 78 offshore markets, dropping by 59%. Yes. Internationally dropping by 59%. That's not a good thing. That is not good, Nance. Top 5 markets are China. Yeah, that's right. Doing the work of the Communist Party over there. 114.4 million from Mexico, 8.5 UK. These are really bad numbers for The Flash. Goes on to say Disney Pixar's Elemental, meanwhile, had much better holds in its second frame, sliding by just 18%, 7% when excluding China. Korea is particularly notable with strong social scores. In this frame, it was up 18%, becoming the first movie to overtake local juggernaut The Roundup No Way Out at number 1, as well as leading over new entry Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Yes, and Spider-Verse has been out for much longer, and so to me, because of piracy, etc., that actually makes a lot more sense. In Korea, Elemental had the 3rd highest sophomore weekend for Pixar titles after Inside Out and Toy Story 4, as well as 40% above Zootopia, and I'm sure that you were ignoring tons of other contextual clues like, hey, how far from the initial release did those other movies get released, right? Were they the same weekend? Were they a week delayed? Were they 2 weeks delayed? What could it have been? And also, a little thing called inflation, which they always love to ignore as well, in addition to average ticket price, things like that. Either way, even though Elemental's holds seem to be good on paper, in practicality, we know that, hey, if you're holding from nothing or next to nothing, you still got basically nothing. So let's say you have $1. Let's say you make $1 opening weekend, and then your next weekend, you make 75 cents. You're like, that's a pretty good hold, right? You made $1 this weekend, 75 cents that weekend, but then you recognize, oh, but the film cost $1,000 to make. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, just because there's a good hold, that doesn't mean anything, because when you have a very, very small amount of money, when you have a very small pot of money, the percentages that you're getting from that don't really matter nearly as much as when you have a large pot with small drops in subsequent weeks. But again, that's kind of getting into the weeds, I guess, into the minds of the people over at Deadline and other mainstream media outlets. Goes on to talk about here, our buddy Tony, Spider-Verse swinging ahead of Elemental after Game of Chicken. Was it really much of a game, Tony? Flash edging out No Hard Feelings. Yes, No Hard Feelings, the brand new film with Jennifer Lawrence. Yeah, didn't even make top 3. Oh, okay. Yeah, if that film costs $45 million, and so let's just say, yeah, Jennifer Lawrence, not nearly a box office draw, as much as people maybe had thought. Maybe a lot of it's because no one cares about stars, or for her, in her case, maybe it's because people are just tired of her talking nonsense in her real life. Because she talks about a lot of nonsense that is not based in fact or reality. And people don't want to go see or support someone like that. And, oh, wait a minute, your film that also contradicts a lot of things that you try to talk about. Well, okay then. Let's go ahead and dive into the numbers, though, because this is quite interesting. Spider-Verse, right, as you saw from that headline. Spider-Verse, 4 weeks out from its initial release, dropping yet another 29%. So we're seeing strongholds week after week after week coming out of this Sony production, right? This movie has had strongholds from the very first week, rather for the very first to second week, and we've continued to see that now going on into week 4. Another 19.3, its total domestic up to $317 million. These are numbers that could never be reached by the likes of Elemental or The Flash, and not even the likes of The Little Mermaid, even though they're going to try and talk about saying that the holds for that movie have also been very strong. Yes, but the week 1 to week 2 drop was actually pretty high. You know, it was a pretty big drop, not the biggest drop that we've ever seen, but still big enough. And ever since then, it really, because the opening weekend was not as high as what one would have suspected for a movie of that size, especially one costing $250 million when everything is said and done, not even including marketing. When you're getting to $270 million in 5 weeks, where you have a film for 4 weeks getting to $317, that also costs $100 million versus $250 million. Hopefully that context brings you into the understanding of why Spider-Verse is a massive success, while as Little Mermaid continues to be a massive financial failure. Not nearly as much of a failure, though, as another Disney product, which is the film Elemental. Making $18.4 million, some people might say stuck on 38% hold. That's really good, but look at that total. In 2 weeks, you've only made $65 million. Even The Flash, which had a catastrophic 72% drop, is still at 87.6. Why? Because its opening weekend numbers were a lot higher. This again goes back to why the hold is not everything. If you're holding from very little, doesn't mean a whole lot. If you're holding from a big amount, okay, then we're starting to talk. Spider-Verse had a very big opening and has had small drops ever since. We cannot say the same thing for the other movies. And not to mention, we're not even talking here about international numbers at this point in time. Either case, Spider-Verse, well on its way to being somewhere probably between 650 and 750 worldwide, whereas Elemental and The Flash, they'd be lucky to get 300 million, maybe? We'll break down the numbers and talk about what their prospects actually are. But The Flash indeed dropped 72%. That's one of the big stories going on right now. I think, honestly, to me, one of the biggest headlines about it is not even the fact that some people are reporting that it could lose $300 million. Again, certain caveats have to be made in order for that to be true. We're relying on rumors and speculation and quote unquote inside sources. But on the actual data, on the outside numbers, it doesn't really matter because this film is just not going to do well. This film is going to be a massive catastrophe and possibly one of the biggest box office flops, not only for this past year, but really for the past few years. And in fact, on paper, if you just take the word of what's being reported as budgets for each of these movies, Elemental, because of such a smaller number, actually could end up being a bigger box office flop than The Flash. But again, we'll go further into those differences in a little bit. So hold on, keyboard warriors trying to say, but I was told, but this is the... Hold on. We'll break it down. We'll give you the full spectrum, the full gambit, as it were, of information, so that way you can determine for yourself which makes the most sense to you. No Hard Feelings at number 4, though. This is the brand new film from Sony, $15.1 million on a $45 million budget. Not really all that great. I would not be surprised if we project that film will be a box office flop because, hey, It's J-Law. Transformers Rise of the Beast coming in the number 5 spot, another 44% drop. So this film overall worldwide is over $300 million. So, okay, better than what some may have expected. Not going to be nearly enough to make up for what was way too much spent on that movie. Asteroid City continues to have one of these weird releases similar to what an A24 film would get, where it started off at a very few amount of screens and now is at 1675. These are films that are a lot harder to track, so I'll have more projections on this movie probably when it gets officially out of theaters. But hey, overall, over $10 million domestically so far. Not the worst numbers that we have seen. Not to mention its per theater ratio, right, of $5,300 per screen is better than the per theater for every other major film that is ahead of it. So it goes to show you, just because you have more theaters does not necessarily mean you got more butts in seats. Little Mermaid at $2,600 per screen after 5 weeks saw a 22% hold. However, this film is starting to lose theaters, and again, $300 million domestically would not surprise me, but it's not going to make nearly enough internationally for it to really make any type of a splash. See what I did there, Deadline. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, however, is pretty much the only positive note that Disney has since really Avatar 2, right? Because of the splits with Avatar 2, they probably got a decent amount of money for that movie. Guardians is really the only film that they could say that they've made profit off of because of how well it has been doing, right? It's been having strong holds for 8 weeks now, and it continues to add on to its profits. We're looking at probably $100+ million in profits when everything is said and done, and that's not even including things like merchandising, etc. But as you all know, I don't dive down that rabbit hole with merchandising, because if you're going to add in more positives and more pluses and more credits, well, then you also have to take into account other costs. And in the end, they typically end up canceling each other out, which is why I just stick to the typical formula that I use. And so, hey, $100 million for Disney is a good thing. But when you put that up to the $300+ million that they've lost from Elemental and Little Mermaid combined, yeah, doesn't really make up a whole lot. The Blackening from Lionsgate week 2 dropped 50%. Seems okay, I guess. Boogeyman from 20th Century Studios, which is Disney, 30% hold in the 4th week of release, but this film is still also looking to be a flop. Looking internationally at all these movies, we have Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, $560 million worldwide. As I mentioned when the film first opened up, most films make about a third of their entire box office worldwide in their opening weekend. And because of that new metric that I've been able to talk about and discuss, it's been interesting to see exactly how well it matches up in the modern day of, modern era of filmmaking and of box office. And I had mentioned saying, hey, because this movie made around, $200 million or so worldwide its opening weekend, you're looking at a film that probably will get north of 600. Well, hey, right now, 4 weeks out, it's $560 million. And so has a good chance of getting to 600 and crossing 600 by the end of next weekend. And so it's looking like that is pretty much staying on pace. Would not be surprised to see this film end between 650 and 750, if I had to guess. Elemental, again, if we're going to use the same metric for this, and as you all know, we like to do things live here on OMB Reviews because it's a lot of fun. It's fun for me, it's fun for you, and then for others it drives them crazy, but I think it's great. So let's go ahead and use that same metric that I've been using for Spider-Verse and other films as well. That the first 2 weeks, right, we already did this one for Elemental. We talked about how because this film's worldwide overall box office, in fact, we'll jump to that chart just so that way I can try to make a point. So I'm giving you a little sneak peek here. But I had mentioned that for Elemental, $44.5 million was its global opening weekend. So if we took that into account, I think we already did this calculation at another time, but that would have put the film's total international box office at around $133.5 million. Now, it looks like this film is actually holding a lot better, which means that it's got better chances of being able to actually do much more than that initial estimate. But we do have a little bit more accurate numbers, as I always say. Hey, this new thing going on with the opening weekend projections, it's interesting. It helps us get a bit of an idea of what the range likely will be for the film's end result. But ultimately, the gold standard is still the first 2 weeks of initial release. That is always where we're able, because we get that week 1 to week 2 drop-off, get a better idea and understanding of where a film's overall prospects will end. And so we'll look at Elementals in just a little bit. Looking at The Flash, $210 million worldwide, again, on a that's being reported, $220 million budget is still really, really bad, and we'll talk about just how bad things can get. No Hard Feelings, $24.6 million, looking to be a flop. Transformers Rise of the Beast, also still looking to be a flop, even though it is trending a bit higher in certain areas than had been initially thought. Still not going to be enough. Asteroid City, too early to say. Little Mermaid at $499.3, again, looks like it's going to get to $500+ million, but How much past 500 million is going to be? I don't think this film gets north of 550, but we'll have to wait and see. Guardians at 826. Hey, it's added another $6 million from last weekend. So hey, the 2 weeks ago it added another 10. This past week it added another 6. If we continue to see those kinds of holds, obviously this film's getting closer and closer to a physical media release in addition to the PVOD release. So you're looking at this film, having a chance still to get to 840 to possibly $850 million. I would like to see this film to get to 850 because this film is significantly better than Wakanda Forever, and that would put the film on par with Wakanda Forever. And it'd be interesting to see exactly where the film holds up in that case. Blackening at $12 million. I don't really have any interest in going to see this movie, but hey, if you've seen it, let me know how it is. Boogeyman, also no interest. I'm not a big horror person, but not looking good for that movie. Fast 10 looks like it will probably cap out a little over $700 million, but because of its massive $340 million budget, there's no way in heck that this movie is going to make any money. Whereas Super Mario Bros. Movie, $1.3 billion, this film could potentially be the biggest box office film of the entire year. That is, of course, unless Dead Reckoning Part 1, the new Mission Impossible movie, is able to outperform the projections. Now, I'm going to be talking about this on the Good Morning Asgard podcast tomorrow. That, I believe it was a Hollywood Reporter, did come out with updated projections where they think the film is going to make around $90 to $100 million at the domestic box office. This is coming off of the fact that you have films or places like Box Office Pro that have the movie closer to around $50 to $60 million domestic. So let's just say that kind of higher number projected could indicate that could indicate that things are going very well for that film's chances. And if it's able to have a similar performance, and obviously it's not the same movie, so we cannot say that for sure, just because Tom Cruise is in it, just because there's stunts in it, just because of any of these other similarities, does not guarantee anything as far as similar performances in the box office. We obviously will use it as a comparison, as many people will. Ultimately, I don't think the film will make as much as Top Gun and Maverick, but whether it has enough to make $1 billion, can't wait to see those opening weekend numbers. Let's go ahead and go to the charting, though, because I know that's what some of y'all have been waiting for. So if you look at Elemental, right, we had talked about this earlier. So right now, after 2 weeks, it has made $120 million. Now, because it has had a little bit of a stronger hold, right? So remember, most films make about a third of their entire box office. This film seems to be holding a little bit better in certain areas. Right now, that means I'm projecting worldwide this movie will make somewhere between $173 and $242 million. And that means if this film follows typical historical trends, right? This data right here is based off of history, right? Most films fall somewhere in this range. They either, in a best case scenario, double their amount of money, so they have very, very strong holds. They double the amount of money they've made in their first 2 weeks, or it falls off a cliff and the first 2 weeks account for around 70% of their entire box office. And so if that is the case, then you do see the films end up losing quite a bit of money, usually in those cases. But that means that on average, we can expect that Elemental might not make it to $200 million worldwide. Now, for a Disney Pixar film, it shouldn't take a lot to realize how bad that is, especially when your production budget is $200 million. Now, some people out there still don't quite get it, that your production budget is not your total cost, right? Production budget is just how much money it took for you to make the movie. You then have to add in more money because you also got to spend money on marketing, and marketing can be very expensive. In fact, most films will spend, you see that number right there, $200 million? Half of that is 100, right? You don't normally spend. This is the typical marketing cost. Changes with different movies, changes with different studios. Some speculate that the number that is spent on marketing is higher than what it has been in the past. I just go by what the standard has always been for many, many years now. But typically, your entire total cost is 1.5 times the budget. So that takes, again, the budget plus half of the budget added on, which would account for marketing. So about $100 million in marketing would mean the total cost is $300 million. So if you're only making $200 million, all right, as in the case of Elemental, likely will end somewhere around that number, and you're spending $300. And then you remember, out of that $200 million that is projected to make, the studio only gets about 60% of that. Some people will speculate that it's a 50-50 split. Again, prior to the pandemic, it was always understood or mostly understood to be a 60-40 split. And I know there's differences of opinion on that. In either case, though, when you recognize that, at the very least, you have to admit, whether you think it's 50-50 or 60-40, they don't get 100% of the box office. So 200 versus 200, yeah. If you don't know how the box office works, that sounds like it's broken even. It sounds like it's made its money back. But when you remember, oh, wait a minute, now I got to cut that number in about half and compare it to the $300 million that it spent. Oh, I can see now why the box office is being projected to be a massive loss for it, right? And we'll talk about what those losses are going to look like in a second. But let's go first to The Flash, right? With $210 million worldwide in its first 2 weeks of release, this film is expected to do a little bit better, but is only expected to make $300 to $400 million worldwide. So roughly between $300 and $350 million if the film performs as a typical bad movie. Now, if the wheels continue to fall off to an even worse degree, you could see this film come in even underneath $300 million worldwide. In either case, the fact that this film, this is what they've been telling us, right? They've told us the film cost $200 to $220 million, right? That's been what's reported. There are some people, to kind of get into the $300 million loss that a lot of people are talking about, you're probably going to see a lot of comments too. Most people probably not having watched the actual video or just skipping ahead to certain parts of the video just to see exactly what my numbers would say. But let's just say if you've heard the number, the movie The Flash is going to lose $300 million. Where does that actually come from? Okay. Well, first off, it comes in a difference in philosophy. That comes from people who think that, for one, that the marketing for the movie is higher than what the typical standard is, right? So based on the typical standard, the total cost for this movie would be roughly around $330 million. Right? So that means the break even will be about $550. That's a 2.5 times the budget. There are some that have it at 3 times the budget. In which case, if this movie, one, costs $220 million, you can see why that would put this well above $600 million as a break even point. But it gets even more complicated than that. There are some people who are going and basing their numbers off of speculation and based off of rumors that they've heard from inside sources. So these are not coming from official sources. So as you all know, for me, when it comes to sources, I'm not saying the people reporting on sources are lying or that they're giving you false information or data. I'm just saying I cannot verify the data that's being given by them. All I can go based off of is what's being actually reported. But let's go ahead and bring this into the equation for a second, okay? Just so that way y'all can see where the $300 million is coming from. So let's assume then that the movie did cost $300 million. Now, personally, I think it probably did cost closer to that, but I cannot confirm that at this time. Just that change alone would mean that the break even jumps up to $750 million, meaning that it would be projected for the movie to lose, on average, $200 to $250 million. And so you can understand that this is based off of a 60-40 split between the theater, or rather between the studio getting the 60% and the theater's getting 40%. Studio's getting 60, theater's getting 40. Now imagine that you change that to 50-50. That's where you get your $300 million from. So just to kind of break that down, play a little bit of inside baseball for anyone wondering why our metrics can be sometimes different between channels. Again, it's a difference in methodology. It's a difference in philosophy. All of it comes from a very, a very pure place, and there's no malice on anyone's side of it. But what I can say, though, is that means the numbers that I use are conservative. It means the numbers that I'm using right now are very, very conservative. So let's assume you're one of those persons trying to argue that the movie's not going to be all that bad and, hey, the movie's doing a lot better. Here's the thing, all right? Let's say that I'm wrong. Let's say that my numbers are indeed this more conservative estimate. If your minimum is $150 million in losses, if that's like a best case scenario and a most likely scenario, let's say that it's $100 million in financial losses. If that is your best case scenario, oh boy, are you in trouble? Not to mention, let's go ahead and go based on these reported numbers. Look at how much more of a financial loss Elemental will actually be for Disney in this case, right? So for The Flash, that's Warner Brothers losses. For Disney, you're actually seeing, and this is based off of, again, $200 million being reported for the budget, etc. This film, because it's doing so poorly, will lose somewhere between $150 and $200 million. Add into that the 100 plus million that's going to be lost from the likes of Little Mermaid, and you can see as to why Disney is in a lot of financial trouble. However, if you take into account The Flash, $100 to $150 million is still not very good. And then when you take into account that the movie probably costs more than $220, and you're getting closer to that $250 to $300 million in financial losses, you can also see why the two biggest losers as far as box office is concerned, as far as the studio is concerned, is The Flash. And is Disney. Or rather, is Disney and is Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers, I don't think gets talked nearly as much as it should be, because if we're talking about financial losers, those two are up there. And Warner Brothers could potentially even be a much bigger box office flop as a studio is concerned. And I might be able to do further breakdowns on that on the Good Morning Asgard podcast at later times. But those are kind of the big numbers as they currently stand. If you want any other further updates on other films, you can go ahead and check and see. As you can see also right here, I have this actual percentage column. What this means is, as I mentioned before, I have that 50 to 70% range, right, where most movies fall. This tells you, based on the current data that's available, where the films currently are. So Spider-Verse, this has actually hit what the bare minimum projection I had for this film was going to be. So that means that the film's probably performing very healthily. It's only been out for 4 weeks, so this film might get closer to 60%, meaning that it still has a little bit of money left to make. You look at a film like Boogeyman, right? This film actually, despite the fact that it's expected to lose money, has performed, again, based on historical standards. The Machine did a lot worse than historical standards. About My Father did worse than historical standards. Little Mermaid has fallen right into line. Fast 10 was just about around at the number that was to be expected. I wouldn't be surprised if when it's all said and done, it falls right around 70%. But as you can see, the vast majority of movies do fall somewhere in that 50 to 70 range. And in fact, I do have a running average here at the bottom just to show you why this is the metric that I use, right? The average for all movies dating back to 2019 is 61%. 2 weeks, that's the first 2 weeks compared to the final box office results. So that's why I use that metric. It is very reliable as far as the data that I have been collecting. But anyway, I wanted to give that bit of information. But before getting further though, that's going to be the end of it. I've talked on for too long. Just got back from a road trip to a family reunion in St. Louis. So thank y'all very much for y'all's patience, for not having a live stream last night, and for this video coming in a bit late. But hey, please make sure to smash that like button, not the fire button. I see smash the rumble button as well. Seriously, you guys are all freaking amazing. I love you guys so much. And it's always fun. I'll see y'all in the comment section down below. You guys are awesome. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Sunday. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my June Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off first with Patreon, Father Luca Illich, Heimir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Hat Reviews, you can check it over at his YouTube channel, Orange Hat Reviews, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel of Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel by the same name as well. Also to my Subscribe Star peeps, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my Locals members, Miss Minnesota hockey fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. And again, thank you all very much for being my supporters. If you want your name shout out at the end of every live stream and every video, check out the top link in the video description below. You also can get access to things like a giveaways channel where I give away Blu-rays, 4K steelbooks, all kinds of stuff every single, most weeks in the month. I try to give away something, or at the very least towards the end of the month, I will make it up with several giveaways. Basically, most people are guaranteed to walk away with something at the end of every single month. So if you want access to that, again, check out the top link in the video description below, as well as access to an exclusive podcast. This past month, I was actually able to record a great podcast with Michelle from Force of Light Entertainment. So you want access to that and also a plethora of other content, check out the link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.